It's a real honor to be on a panel with such esteemed leaders and also future leaders in Ansh at the end. I'm going to start with quick introductions. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves so that I don't mess it up. I have done that before. And then we're going to move into introduction on the panel itself.
Good evening, everyone. Good to be here and good to see so many faces. My name's Parthiv Rishi. I'm a partner at a US-based law firm called Sidley Austin. I've been based in Singapore for 8.5 years, and I do M&A and private equity, if that means anything to anyone. But I basically help my clients invest in, buy, and sell companies.
I'm Larry Nelson. Also nice to see so many faces. I've been in Singapore for 6 years. I'm Microsoft's education business leader for Asia. I've been at Microsoft for 15 years, and I've been in the ed tech space for 34 years. So looking forward to talking about things we do in education with students.
Hi, guys. My name's Ansh Mantry. I'm 16, still studying, and I recently took up one of the Young Founders School's internship.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm Billy. I'm actually the founder of Young Founders School. It's an organization that's about 6 or 7 years old. It's a charity, nonprofit that operates everywhere from Hong Kong to Nigeria. Myself, I've spent about 20 years in finance prior to becoming an entrepreneur. I worked at Morgan Stanley and Credit Suisse, where I actually ran the internship programs as part of my role. So hopefully I have a good sense of at least what the investment banking lens is from this panel. At Young Founders School, we offer two main products. Our mission is to change the way that entrepreneurship is taught to high school students globally. We do that by way of a curriculum that's taught to schools, and they leverage our platform to help instill entrepreneurial skills and 21st century thinking into high school students. And then we also have a virtual internship program that we actually only launched 2 years ago, and as of last year, proud to announce that we are now actually the largest high school internship provider in the world. Last year we completed over 400 internships, and Young Founders School itself put through about 2,500 students through its program just last year. 70% of the students that have gone through our internship actually have been offered some sort of interaction with the company after the internship finished. So we'll touch on what the internships are about and why we think they're extremely exciting. But the topic of this panel was really, the seed of it was formed last year when ChatGPT launched. And I wrote a blog post. For those of you that haven't subscribed, you're welcome to do so. And the blog post was actually aimed at Parthiv's profession, where I'd had dinner with a friend of mine who's a lawyer, and he said that ChatGPT, within 4 months of launch, had been trained on their internal data and was as good as a year 7 lawyer. And that absolutely shocked me, because being a tech geek, I'm a bit of a student of history, and we've seen many, many technological revolutions. Most of them have impacted blue-collar workers, and typically they've reskilled and taken better, higher-paid jobs. Even the introduction of Microsoft Excel in 1985, some of you do remember that, I can see from the hair on your head, was at the time a huge scare for a lot of people, because there was about 1.1 million bookkeepers in the US at the time. But what happened is that technology enabled more people to actually understand the financial accounts, take part in manipulating numbers for business purposes, and actually, if you now look at bookkeepers, accountants, finance professionals, you're now looking at a workforce that's over 3.5 times what the original workforce of the bookkeepers was. So actually it was an enabler, not a destroyer of jobs. But today is different. Today we're in a very new paradigm. Goldman Sachs thinks that 300 million jobs are going to be impacted by AI. We were lucky enough in my day job to have partnered with Airbnb. Brian Chesky is famously replacing a number of programmers with Copilot. And just recently, IBM announced that they're also canceling a number of job postings because they're just using ChatGPT. So if you want someone to blame, obviously Microsoft is here. No, I'm kidding. But you know, this is a real challenge. I'm a parent of a young, very young 2.5-year-old, but the parents that we deal with at Young Founder School are parents of students that are about to choose their career prospects. And I don't think in my lifetime we've seen any technology that is going to have as profound of an impact on white-collar jobs as we're about to witness with AI. And so I was like, you know what? Let's get some people in a room, and people that are way smarter than me, which is actually all of them, including Ansh, and get them to talk about what they think is going to be the impact. So we'll chat for half an hour or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. Look, before we touch on jobs themselves, let's start with education. You run a large sales force that sells into educators. Education itself as a topic, given that personalized tutoring was extremely complicated and expensive pre-AI and is potentially going to get very easy and much more interesting with AI, what is your 5-10 year view on both education and the art of assessment?
Well, I think, as you said, a lot's changed, and I think the kind of change that we're seeing now today is a little bit different. In fact, I've given a couple of keynotes in the last few months where I've talked about some of these topics, if you will. And as I mentioned in my introduction, I've been in ed tech for about 35 years, which means I started when I was 5. But in all seriousness, my first job in ed tech was 1989. I joined a little software company that my mother and the founder had started. They were actually doing special ed programs for school districts originally, but my mother changed it into a software company. And then in the mid-'80s and late 80s, I joined it as they started to develop and publish some of their own products. So actually, I do have an entrepreneur background as well, having run a family business for 10 years with my mother, who's a former teacher, educator, principal, and superintendent. In my tenure at that family business from 89 to 99, what we did that was interesting was we were creating core curriculum products delivered in software that replaced textbooks. Now, this was a US-based company. We were focused on the US market. But what we did, my mom was amazing at getting grants with the California and the Florida Departments of Ed and the National Science Foundation, and we created literally 13 grade levels of core curriculum delivered in software with Laserdisc that I, as a sales guy basically coming in, got adopted as a textbook alternative 15 times in 12 states, which meant schools in those states could use their state textbook money and buy our software and use it to teach middle school science or K-8 social science, which were the curriculum areas that we developed around. And we made money in 3 of those states, not all. But the point is that, the first state was West Virginia, interestingly enough, in 1992. And since then, that was when multimedia and video discs and other technology were going to completely change education. And then after that kind of slowed down a little bit, things started to change where the internet became a thing. And that was going to change education. Then it was things like blockchain. Then it was things like MOOCs. And today, now it's AI that we're very excited about in terms of how it's going to change education. And the conversation that I've had, actually, I spoke at a Korea event at the Global Education Innovation Summit, which was sponsored by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education. We had a panel that was originally going to just talk about innovation and technology. And the night before the panel discussion, we were at a dinner, and we were given this long list of questions that the ministry wanted us to talk about. And we kind of thought about it, it's it's kind of a boring conversation. Let's talk about this concept of why AI. Why and what's going to be different about AI today in education, and how is it going to make a difference? And honestly, while I don't know that the panel came to any conclusions, it's influenced my thinking in a couple of other talks that I've done since then. And what I've come to a conclusion about in terms of why I think it is a little bit different now is kind of based on a couple things. One, while this feels like a moment where AI has come out of nowhere, and the last year, ChatGPT, AI itself has actually been in development and has been going on for since the 1950s through a number of different little series and hoops and kind of accomplishments that in the last year, though, have accelerated rapidly and have gotten a whole lot of attention. So it's been around a while. It's actually already, and has been for probably 5-10 years anyway, integrated into a lot of tools and technologies that we use today that you may not even think about. Your autocorrect, your translator tools, speech to text, things like that. Those are things that have been running on AI, cognitive services technologies, for years, and that we've been rolling out and seeing used. So some of that technology's been kind of invading into our lives, so to speak, already, unbeknownst to us. The other thing, and I think is really kind of an interesting idea, and when I've done this keynote last couple of times, I've used a video. How many of you have remembered the movie Star Trek IV, Coming Home? So the whole storyline, you may recall, was they had to come back in time to get a gray whale and bring it forward so that it could communicate, maybe other whales or something, to save the universe, right? And so they had to come back in the 1990s, or they came back to a point in time in the 1990s in the San Francisco Bay Area when Mac computers were pretty much just out, right? So there's this moment in the movie where the engineer, Scotty, is with the doctor, and he needs to design a aquarium essentially large enough and strong enough to house this whale in water, transport it, on the enterprise, forward in time, blah, blah, blah. So he needs to figure out the calculations to do that. So he ends up in some machine shop, and they stick him in front of a computer, and they say, figure it out. So Scotty sits down, he looks in front of the computer, and he says to the computer, but it doesn't respond. So the doctor, McCoy, right, basically hands him a mouse and says, here. And Scotty says, oh, of course. So he takes the mouse and he says, computer. But it still doesn't respond. So then the guy who's like in the machine shop says, use a keyboard. And it's like, oh, the keyboard, how quaint. So he types away. My point is that when we think about Star Trek and we think about how amazing and robust the technologies in there, exist then in the future, the way we envisioned it, the interface with the computer and with that technology and that knowledge and that learning was just natural language. You interfaced with the computer. It helped you solve problems, right? I think that today is one of the things that's an important marker and a difference in AI and ChatGPT and generative AI. The fact that it opens up an ability for many of us who may want to use technology or do use technology, but maybe didn't have the computer or programming skills to do so. Now with this natural language interface, I think it unlocks a lot of new opportunities. The whole assessment thing, that's a long debate. I'd love to talk about that too, but I think maybe you want to carry on.
It's a great analogy. And, as we look at, we had a very interesting, as a side note, conversation with some software company. Basically helps you analyze your data, right? But you need to know SQL. For any of you who don't know, it's a programming language that helps you query a database. And one of the other investors said, well, this is a disaster for your business, right? Because now you don't need to know this language. You can just type in ChatGPT. And said, no, but this is a huge unlock. Now imagine the number of people that can actually query a database. So it's a kind of a similar thing that if I can just say, give me my sales for the last 15 days in a chart versus having to understand a very complex SQL command, it does open up very different opportunities. I'm going to move on to Parthiv, and I think this is a good segue into talking about skills. And I'd be very curious to know, one of the reasons we started Young Founder School is because what we realized when I was at Credit Suisse was that we needed to impart entrepreneurial skills into people that went into almost any profession, whether you're a doctor, lawyer, banker, teacher, whatever. Everyone needed those core skills. In your career, has the skills and the types of people that you're looking for in the law changed? And what is it today?
So it's a really good question, actually. And I think I've been a lawyer for 20 years, and I practiced in the US, in Europe, and in Asia. And I think the one thing that has changed markedly from when I first started was entrepreneurialism. Ultimately, we're lawyers, but we run a business. And I think increasingly, as I've kind of grown up as a lawyer, what has been instilled in us more and more is, you run a business, you're generating revenue, we don't work for free. You're building relationships, you're selling a product. No different to any other business, we just happen to be in the business of law. And it's very different from when you first started. When you're at university and when you're studying law, you think of it as a profession and, you're going to be a great lawyer, you're going to be analyzing interesting cases, you might be arguing in court. You don't really think about the business side of it. And then as you become more senior, you realize that actually, it's just a business like any other business. And so, one of the key skill sets that we start instilling in our lawyers really early on is all of those business skills. How do you build relationships? How do you go out and win work? Do you understand the sector you're in? You might be a great lawyer, but do you understand what your competitors are doing? Do you understand what developments are taking place in the legal landscape? Do you understand what technologies are changing the profession? So understanding all of that is going to be really important to your progression. And as associates and other lawyers kind of progress through the system, obviously being a great lawyer is a given. There are many great lawyers out there. But what makes a really successful lawyer is not how good you are at kind of the legal stuff. It's really how good you are at the other things. How good are you at building a business? How good are you at winning clients? How good are you at convincing someone that you're going to be better for them as a legal advisor than your competitor? And those are really the things that stand you out from. There's hundreds of lawyers out, even in Singapore. There's like 50, 100 law firms out there. How do I convince a client looking to do X, Y, and Z who wants certain type of legal advice to pay me rather than my competitor who sits in an office who does exactly what I do? It's really those softer skill sets. And again, one of the things that you talked about, kind of core competencies, I think even with generative AI and all of these kind of technology tools that are becoming available that will change the legal profession, I think the core skills aren't going to change. And those are things like communication. Ultimately, you're advising people, businesses, clients. They're all underlying all that is people and who you're interacting with other people. So being a good communicator, understanding how to communicate everything from distilling a complex legal principle or argument into simple language that someone can understand, or explaining to your client who's trying to buy a business what the legal issue is in a way that they can understand. That's all communication skills, and that's a kind of really important skill set that people need to continue to develop, because I think we're kind of losing the art of communication a little bit. Relationship building, again, we're still going to be working, you're still going to be working with people, you're still going to be working in teams, you're still going to be working and winning clients, and that's all about relationship building. Teamwork, again, in any business, whether it's law, whether it's at Microsoft, whether you're a founder starting a new business, it's all about teamwork and working well with other people. And even if you have technology that you're using, you're still going to be working with other people. And so understanding how to work as a team, understanding how to be a leader. Actually, just before this, I was doing an internal presentation to some of our managing associates on how to manage a team. Because, again, you sort of grow up really focused on being a good lawyer, and then suddenly you're managing people, and no one teaches you how to do that. And really talking them through, well, what does it mean to manage people? How do you give feedback? How do you empower people? How do you kind of give them responsibility? How do you help the people behind you grow? All of those skill sets are going to be super important, irrespective of where we end up, in 20 years' time.
But just jump in there. How do you expect, your business is one of training, right? There's no real textbook that can teach you all the different nuances of how to be a senior lawyer. You have to just do the doing. If you're going to get rid of a whole lot of junior lawyers because they're going to get replaced by a computer, how do you envisage that training program to evolve?
So we look at it a different way. Actually, we're pretty excited about AI and the other tech tools that are coming out. Not because we think that we're going to lose half of our organization to technology. Actually, there's going to be certain law firms that might disappear. There may be a consolidation of law firms. There may be law firms that just fail because they haven't integrated technology into their service offering. But if you do all of that stuff well, actually, I don't think we're going to have less lawyers. I think what those lawyers are going to do is going to be different. I think when you're a junior lawyer, actually, it's hard. When I was a junior lawyer, I worked till 2 a.m. every morning in a data room doing due diligence. You had to go through that process and get stuck in the detail. You don't have the ability to stand back and understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think you talked about the bookkeepers. Once they didn't have to do all the detail, they could step back and really understand the context in which they were working. So I think for junior lawyers who will have technology to enable them to do their job more efficiently, it'll take away all the humdrum, hard labor, and actually they can sit and advise their clients better. And we're in the business of advising clients. That's what we get paid to do. Our clients don't really want to pay us to sift through thousands of documents in a data room. They want us to advise them, apply our judgment, help them solve problems. And I think AI is going to help us do that. So I think everyone's got a different perspective, but I actually look at AI with excitement, because I think actually it's going to enable us to do our job better, make our job more interesting, and actually encourage more people to become lawyers.
Ansh, so just for context, so Ansh is a student at SJI. He recently completed an internship through Young Founder School at B Capital, which is Eduardo Saverin's, the co-founder of Facebook's fund. Ansh, what do you want to be when you graduate? Quick fire question.
Business analyst.
Use microphone.
Business analyst.
What does that mean?
I want to be the guy that a business owner comes to, and I want to help him grow his business. Maybe not a business analyst, a consultant, like for McKinsey. I like the lifestyle, and it's...
You had some snickers don't worry, is because consultants are very close to the taxman and lawyers as people that people don't like to pay for. Just like his dad was a consultant, just so you know.
Yeah, so I look up to him. It's my interest. I don't want to be a teacher. I don't want to be a cleaner. I don't want to be a lawyer. I mean, good for you, but I just
No one wants to be a lawyer until they're a lawyer.
I just don't find it fun. I think it would be fun helping other people to grow, and you can only do that if you're an expert at something like business.
So tell me, are you and your friends concerned about AI and the impact on the job market, or how do you look at your job prospects when you graduate?
Well, me and my friends, we're we have a positive opinion towards AI. It really helps us get through our schoolwork really fast. That's why. And as for my future job prospects, I think in 20 years when I get a job, okay, not 20 years, but still, I think AI is something that's going to help me in a positive way. When everyone in 10 years has access to the same knowledge and information, I think the fact that at this young age I'm starting to learn how to use these things, that's going to be my edge. That and my soft skills, communication, things like that. And it's really important to be in the flow with the technology of the time. I try not to be pessimistic, but I think in the next 10 years, we're not going to have anything as impactful as AI come up. And I've been on the top of it since it came out. So
How much help are you getting from your school? Are they ignoring AI? Are they teaching it? What are they doing?
the school hasn't ignored it completely, but they have warned us, don't use it. It's not real.
So they banned it.
Yeah, basically.
It's not real. It's a figment of imagination.
Well, they don't think that it represents us truthfully. So they know that we use it, but they don't like it.
I
But
see.
the teachers know it and they encourage it.
Okay. Fascinating. So Nelson, if you were a student today, let's say you were a few years younger than you are, and you were going to study something, what do you think you would study to make yourself as bulletproof as possible for the future workforce?
What would I study, or what would I maybe advise, or maybe think about some of the students
Okay.
here, or whatever? Yeah.
Advise.
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking a little bit about this ahead of this session, and I was struck by. I always kind of go back to two sets of advice that I got. One in a very large setting, advice given to about 10,000 people all at once when I graduated from graduate school at Cornell. And the second was a one-on-one situation with a mentor that I respected, one of my first jobs out of college at Bloomingdale's. And they both said essentially the same thing. And it was basically, I remember the president of Cornell basically to the graduating class said, the secret to life, the secret to success is to figure out what it is you like to do and then find somebody to pay you to do it. Which actually kind of aligned very much to what this gentleman, Glenn Sank, shared with me when I was at Bloomingdale's, my first job out of college. He'd gone to Wharton for an MBA, and he actually went on to have a tremendously fabulous career. Among other things, he went from Bloomingdale's somewhere else, but he ended up at Anthropologia, the chain, when it was a single store concept, and blew it out to thousands of stores around the world in a multi-billion-dollar business. But anyway, I remember sitting down with him, having lunch as I was about to go to Cornell for my MBA, and asking him, what courses do you think I should take? And he said to me, he's like, Larry, whatever you do, don't take the courses that you think people think you should take. Figure out what it is you really like to do. And he said, for me, for example, I love to shop. I'll never forget this conversation. He said, I love to shop. And so to me, buying, being in retail is just what I love. It's what I do. It's not a job. It's a passion. It's something I'm really interested in. So he said, what you should do is figure out what it is you like to do, what gets you excited, what excites your passions, and follow things that help you grow in that space. So for me today, I agree with a lot of things that were said in terms of the importance of skills. For me, I've always been all about being on teams, high-performing teams, participating on them, leading them. Sales is one way to do that for sure, and certainly running a business is a way to apply that as well. So, all that said, if the technology part of the conversation is what you want to tease out in this conversation, if technology is an area of interest or something that you're interested, I do think AI is one of these tools that is important to know. It is a tool. How we use it, I think provide really good insight into whether or not schools want to endorse or support, or whether or not they know how to actually use it yet in their teaching or in their practice in the classroom. I think remains an evolving thing. But the fact is, there are students using it. So I think educators need to think about, and I know a lot of them already are, and there's some really thoughtful stuff coming out around this. How do we actually integrate and use these tools in a way that help prepare our students for their opportunities, knowing that it will be a tool and something that they use. So how do you then develop the right kinds of critical thinking skills, prompt development skills, things like that, so that you think about, the quality of the data and information that you're getting from these sources?
So how many schools that you cover are actively engaging with you on ChatGPT, Enterprise GPT? Like very
If they're
few?
not, they want to, and they're trying to figure that out.
Okay, so they're in discovery phase.
Many already are, though. We see an incredible uptick and adoption using ChatGPT tools in classroom, in schools, to develop content and curriculum. And this is where it's really, because to me, there's like two areas where it's going to have an impact in education. Clearly what goes on in the classroom experience, the student experience, and the teacher experience. But also, how does it help the institution itself run more efficiently? And how can the tools be used to save educators time in scoring, in assessment, in attendance, all the reporting and analytics that actually is an important part of how we help students learn in K-12 and in higher ed.
Actually, one thought that came to my mind about one very positive use of AI, and I'm going to put this question to you, Parthiv. I was very, very fortunate to get a job at Morgan Stanley. We were from a relatively underprivileged background in North England. I went to state comprehensive, nothing fancy. But I just happened to go to Warwick University, which was number 5 of 5 schools that Morgan Stanley hired from. And the head of HR told me over drinks one day that if you had been at the 6th school, which was Durham, which was actually my second choice, my application would have been auto-deleted. Right? I had a 10-year successful career. I was one of the youngest directors in London. And I loved working there. It was one of the things I'm most proud of. But I often think back to that moment of I could have been auto-deleted. And the reason that you get deleted has got nothing to do with their unwillingness to look at other talent. It's simply a matter of time. They get 3,000 applications a year. There's only so many people. I wonder if Sidley is the same, right? You have certain schools you hire from. And I do wonder whether we are about to witness an unlock, whether AI can actually help us unlock what is actually true talent versus just the school you went to. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think back in our day, it was like that. I think things have changed considerably in the last 20 years. I think all organizations will look to more diverse organizations to hire from, more diverse backgrounds to hire from. They'll be involved in initiatives to try and encourage people from less privileged backgrounds to apply, do internships, get more access to, whether it's law, whether it's banking, those sorts of industries that perhaps their parents or their family just weren't involved in, so they just didn't have any visibility. So I think that's definitely changed, and I think organizations are very cognizant of the fact that they don't just want to pick from, Ivy League schools or red brick universities, because if I look at some of the senior leaders of the organizations I've been at, they had pretty diverse backgrounds, because diversity brings with it different experiences, different skill sets. Sometimes people who went to Oxbridge got taught by the same colleges, same tutors, all kind of come out the same. And actually, that's not that helpful when you come into business and into real life. So how AI or technology could change that, I think ultimately, at least in what I do, it's still a people business. And I think one of the things we'll talk about later is kind of some of the advice that we'd give kind of people leaving school, going to university, looking for jobs. But how do you stand out from the crowd, right? The reason why we have grades and the reason why we have, or your organizations trying to sort of select from certain universities is you can't choose from the whole world, right? You've got to figure out where you're going to choose from, because otherwise it's going to be too cumbersome. But how do you stand out from the crowd? How do you make yourself different? How do your experiences make you more unique than the guy next door to you? So, and I don't think technology or any of that's going to change that, right? It's really your life experience and what you get yourself involved in and the different things you decide to learn, whether you learn how to, if you're a lawyer, you learn how to code, or you learn how to do this, or you decide to do 2 years at a technology company before you start law. Those are things that will make you stand out, that will make you more employable, and that will ultimately make you better at what you do.
It's a great segue into our internship program, which is designed to do exactly that, right? So, Ansh, why don't you tell us about the internship you did with B Capital? What did you learn? How did you find it?
In my internship, the project scope was to find 30 companies in the Southeast Asian market in the climate tech sector, startups only, at the very first stage. And I had to construct a slide deck and present it to the team that was given to me. at the end of the 3 weeks.
What were the biggest challenges that you encountered?
I think the biggest challenges was time management. Number one was time management. I was also in school that time, so I was working 14 or 16 hours a day. It wasn't easy. And another thing was my problem solving. I hadn't done anything like this before, and they don't teach you anything in school that would have helped me with this anyways. So I really had to learn a lot from the people in my team. My mentor, he was really nice. He had achieved a lot. He was so humble and helpful. He was always willing to help me. And all of the people I talked to in the office, they were all helping me because I didn't even know what to do. Even the first step, I had never done anything like this before. So even in the beginning, they were helping me. And I was shocked that I hadn't learned any of this before. And then another big challenge was the task that they gave me was for startups. They're not even established at all, and there's no information for them on the public domain. So I had to think really cleverly, not even logically, cleverly, to figure out a way to give them something from nothing. That's something that I don't think you can learn in a classroom.
Trust me, the feeling of you don't know what you're doing, actually, every Monday morning, I sit there. It never goes away, trust me. It's very familiar. But, I think these are the kind of, these are the kind of experiences that we want to give to students age of 16. He came out of, the team told me that the transformation that they saw in Ansh just over an 8-week period was really quite incredible. And, even as his dad is there in the audience and can tell you as well, when you get thrown in the deep end, obviously there's a lot of guidance and help along the way, but you have to swim, right? That's similar to how you are in the world of work. I'm going to open it for questions because I want to keep it as interactive as possible. I'm going to pass in microphones just so that we can grab the question on the video.
Hi, Rob Garrett. Thanks, Billy, for having us. Thanks to the panel. One technology that we heard a lot about for the last 3-4 years is blockchain. It's kind of been overcast by a huge AI shadow in the last 18 months. My question is around that. So blockchain's supposed to provide immutable truth on transactions. Do you think there's a role for blockchain in regulating AI and the way it's applied both in the workplace and in education? So essentially, students would have to prove, and I'm interested to get the view of the student, right? Students would have to prove that they haven't cheated using AI. They might have used AI to get data, but they haven't then used the AI to write their findings. And in the workplace, I know there are applications that have come to fruition. It's being used for trade flow funds and the like to prove stuff, but it still hasn't seemed to have mushroomed as fast as AI has. And do you think that that's still an interesting, particularly hearing from Microsoft, that's still a really interesting particular area of evolution in technology that we're going to see in the next decade or more?
Sure. I'm not a technologist, just to be upfront, so I don't know that I can really speak very deeply about blockchain or address your question directly. But to your point earlier about assessment, the question you raised, and I kind of didn't get into it because I talked about a few other things, I think does speak to some extent to one of the issues that you teased out, and that is the whole notion of how do you assess student knowledge or student mastery or anyone's mastery in a world where AI could potentially, generative AI in particular, could potentially enable you to fake it more than you might otherwise. And so I think it's an interesting challenge in education for how educators think about integrating AI into the classroom and as a tool. What I know a lot of educators were thinking about initially was, well, what are kind of clever and strategies we could do to build into our pedagogy around the lesson plan itself? And in fact, kind of starting off out the gate saying, okay, here's an assignment. We want you to write, over the next 2 months or whatever it is, a report on a given topic, whatever it might be, and we want your first draft to be generated by ChatGPT. Then let's start analyzing it and working together collaboratively about, thinking through, whether or not the information that's provided makes sense, changing your prompts, kind of exploring it differently, so that you actually begin to use it as a tool and think about and apply the thinking, critical thinking that you want to elicit and help develop, for the student in that regard. Others as well, I know, are contemplating and looking at different ways to assess so that you would create situations where maybe it's more in-classroom writing exams or presentation type, kind of more peer review type engagements maybe, where it is incumbent upon the student to demonstrate their knowledge and mastery verbally or in some way that, obviously they need to understand it and be able to communicate it. So whether or not blockchain itself as a technology is going to support that or not, I don't know. Interesting idea. But it is, to my point earlier as well, one of those technologies a few years ago that everybody was talking about was going to completely change education, and now no one talks about it at all. I think AI is kind of potentially in that space also, other than the fact that, like I said before, it's been going on for some time. So it's actually has been inculcated into a lot of what we do already. I do think there are some substantive differences with a natural language interface that kind of talks to some of the things that you mentioned as well. And there are other things. But whether or not or how blockchain itself touches it, I don't know.
I mean, just to extend on that assessment point, I can tell you from a Young Founder School point of view, we think that there's going to be a complete sea change in how assessment is done. I'll give you a very basic example. We have a course called Bootcamp. It's one of our flagship courses where you put teams together and you come up with an idea at the start of a boot camp, and then at the end of the weekend, you present it to VCs for funding. And one of the early assessment criteria is what used to be the quality of the idea. Because actually that was a thing that students were really stuck on. Like, I don't have any ideas. And it used to take them ages to come up with an idea. And today, with ChatGPT, give me 20 ideas about how to decrease carbon, boom, right? It's there. So instead of kind of ignoring that fact that does exist, we actually embraced it. So now what we assess is the idea is actually not the thing that we assess. We assess the process. So you've come up with the idea. Now we need to design a way to actually go out and test the idea to see if it's a viable business. So they have to do surveys, they have to go talk to friends, they have to actually maybe make prototypes. That stuff you can't put in ChatGPT. And so that's just like our internal stuff that we've changed as a result of AI, nothing to do with blockchain, but that's an example, I think, of how assessment has to change.
Another thing, if I could jump in as well, it was interesting. I was on another panel here in Singapore, actually, at the EdTech Asia conference, and completely by chance, the weekend before, my wife's really good at like doing weekend activities and chores and things. She keeps me very busy. But in all seriousness, one weekend just before this event, we went through our file cabinet to call out a bunch of stuff. And amongst it, I found this December 1998 Education Week edition, which had just done a very long report on a longitudinal study of our science curriculum impact for Laredo, Texas schools. So it was actually something that was meaningful to me and my family business. So I'd kept it and stored it. But I was interested because I was looking through the edition just to see what was being talked about back at that time, 25 years ago, whatever. And one of the articles, the headline of the article, reminded me so much of how people are responding to ChatGPT today. But it basically said, don't blame the internet for plagiarism. And so in many ways, right, I mean, that's kind of the challenge, the struggle that a lot of us are thinking about here. And I think, when it first came out, I think there was a lot of concern. And I know some of the early thinking was, hey, instead of in a bibliography having to teach a student, cite the 5 sources of information that they used to write the report, now with the internet today, maybe we should ask for 10 and list the 5 that you actually used and the 5 that you didn't and why. So I think we're beginning to figure out how to use tools like ChatGPT in the same way.
The next question.
Hi, my name is Trinity, and I have 2 questions for the speakers today. So my first question is, ChatGPT has great advantages, like Ansh mentioned, right? I'm sure a lot of students like him and me, we do use ChatGPT in our homework. But there's also the disadvantage, which I feel like the panel hasn't brought up, which is fine. So one disadvantage that I could think of, especially for students, would be the overdependence on tools such as AI, right? Because we're lazy, we're just lazy as human beings. So obviously, I don't want to be spending 30 minutes on a piece of homework that I could be using to go outside and go for a run, for example. So this overdependence, I foresee, would lead to students' brains becoming lazier in the long term. So are there any measures that you could think of on how to prevent this, especially from a top-down perspective at Microsoft, where you guys are kind of behind the development of AI such as ChatGPT? My second question would be directed to, I'm so sorry, I forgot your Parthiv, yes. So, because AI is very new technology, right? So there's not much regulation developed or established as of right now. So are there any frameworks or guiding principles that the lawyers use to think about regulation in the AI space for example, how to divvy up the credit for a piece of material generated by AI tools such as ChatGPT? Thank you.
Actually, the first question, I'm going to pass it to Ansh to answer. So your fellow student has asked you, how do you prevent people from being lazy and just leveraging the tools like AI? If you were your parent
Yeah.
and yours teacher,
So
what would you do?
when she said to look at it from a top-down view, that got me thinking, right? The reason we use it, I think it's because we have the access for it. It's all free. And another thing is education. My parents didn't even know about it until maybe it was on mainstream news. I was getting all of my information from Instagram, but before the news caught up, no one knew about it. So I think if you really, it's hard for a human being to change. If they have an easier way, they're not just gonna stop like that. So I think if you want to stop the overdependence, you have to take control of it yourself. So either restrict the access or do something that AI cannot do.
So just one, again, I think you can't, my personal view is we should, the technology is there, you should encourage people to use technology. I don't think there's any kind of value in saying, don't use ChatGPT, don't use generative AI. It's there, it's going to be a real thing that everyone's going to be using. So you may as well make the most of it and use it. And I think this is no different to when we were growing up, right? So if I look back to law school exams, initially we weren't allowed to take any textbooks here, no materials, nothing. You had to basically learn all the legislation off by heart, and then you go in the exam and basically just write it all down. And then they changed and said, well, actually, in the real world, you're going to have all your books and materials with you. So just take all that with you, and we're going to ask you harder, more thoughtful questions, which is we're going to figure out whether you actually understand what we've told you. Can you think with the materials you've been given? And I think ChatGPT is no different, right? So you can get lots of answers from ChatGPT, but do you understand what it's telling you? So when, for example, we have interns who come to intern with us, one of the things we do is we give them an exercise where, we give them a scenario, say a venture capital deal or an M&A deal, and we say, here's a scenario, can you come up with an issues list of the key issues and blah, 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 and they've got to come up with something that's short and insightful. And I don't mind if they go into ChatGPT and, not that they can in the office because they've actually blocked it, but whatever, if they're going to go home and do it, they go in ChatGPT, put the questions in, get the answers. But actually, that's fine. But what we then do is sit down and I ask them questions. So in this scenario, if this happens, what happens then? How do you do this? If they haven't understood what's come out, they're just going to be there going, oh, God, I don't know. They might produce a really nice bit of work, but it's not that helpful. And ultimately, education is for your benefit. You go to school to learn, right? You don't go to school to kind of teach. So it's to cheat, right? You go to school to try and learn, really understand how the world works. That's kind of why you go to school. And so, you can use ChatGPT and other things, but you've got to really understand what's behind the concepts. And actually, the more tools, the more resources you have. We see it with the internet. The younger generation are way more informed than we were because we had like Encyclopedia Britannica, and basically whatever was in there, that's all everyone knew. And now you've got the internet, you can Google anything you want and find out anything you want, which means you're more informed. And actually, the younger generation is smarter. And I think using ChatGPT and generative AI is going to make you smarter, but you've got to think about how you best use that information. The second question is about regulation and kind of how do we kind of regulate the use of that. I think these areas are constantly evolving, and I don't think there's any particular rule. We still haven't found answers for use of data and sovereignty of data and how do you govern all of that. That's still kind of a progressive thing, and I think everything AI related is going to take years, decades to figure out how do you regulate that and how does it work. But as with everything else, regulation is always 10 years behind the reality. And so people are going to be using things and doing things, and regulation is going to be trying to catch up. But it'll never catch up, and that's just the reality of the world and how it's always been.
Just quickly, to the students, would you say you're a minority or a majority in terms of your adoption of technologies like ChatGPT? And then secondfold, education hasn't changed in a very long time. It's one of those sectors like medicine, where people are saying, oh, that's the next big thing that's going to change. So maybe Larry can chuck in on this. But to the students, where would you see the future of education in terms of how would you like to be taught? And where do you think you could learn the most skills? Because, as you said, actually, when you did your internship, there were things that you learned that you just said, oh, you can't learn that in the classroom. How would you think you would be able to incorporate that into what system would you say, that would be awesome, that would be a great way for me to learn? Majority or minority in terms of using technology maybe first, and then we can go.
Yeah, I think we are a majority. If you were to ask any teacher in my school, I'm sure they would have used ChatGPT, I mean, but they would have used it for very random things. Random as in very limited, right? Just to write an email, correct my grammar, stuff like that. But for us in school, they really challenge us on our creativity. That's something that I think most of us use this AI for. Creativity is thinking, it's imagination. And that is probably the hardest part. That's what makes someone successful, like an artist. So we are the majority in the sense that we use it for the most amount of things and for the hardest things. I think it's pretty obvious that we're more technical with it.
Thank you for the question. Could I clarify on what you mean by the majority and the minority? So, because I think the way Ansh interpreted it was whether the whole would be the school and the comparison would be between the students and the teachers. But the way I understood it was, are we the majority students, right, using AI? And I would say yes, because I can speak very frankly as a student, no one likes homework. I mean, every day I look at my list of homework pile up and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just drop out right now. I'm kidding. But I do think that we are the majority. And sorry, your second question was?
Because you said, I don't want to drop it out now. This is not really that.
I totally agree with what you said. I mean, living as a student day to day, the things that we learn in school aren't especially interesting. I mean, I have friends falling asleep in class all the time, and I myself am fighting exhaustion. But one thing that I like about my school is that we have this program called the Talent Development Program. So that's an after-school program where we can go and set up projects. So I have set up my own project, but it's not I didn't do it through the school because there's a lot of paperwork that you need to do. And I think in terms of the efficiency of pushing out projects, it's just a hindrance. So my project is called Makers Club. So what we try to do is champion equity for girls in STEM by providing them with opportunities in the STEM space. So you can approach me later on if you want to find out more. Yes, but my point is that starting a project, I feel, is always the best way to learn. The best way to learn is by doing. So it would be great if schools could integrate more project-based learning, because I know that for the majority, if not for the entirety of elementary school life, it's always just been the teacher's teaching and we're memorizing and we're regurgitating. So I really think that more project-based learning would be useful, because I think my biggest growths and my biggest learnings have been through setting up my Makers Club and also just other projects that were given to us by the school. So definitely I would say I've learned a lot more in my 3 years at secondary school than I have in elementary school in terms of soft skills.
Well, AI in education, I don't think that it would replace our teachers entirely. I think it would be like our own private little teacher, or maybe an assistant to the teacher. I would rather learn something from a human than from a screen. And the thing you said about life skills, that's just something you can never learn unless you do it yourself. You can't type it into the chat and just ask it to give it to you.
So I've been asked to keep my response short, which might be hard. So sorry. Couple things. One, I love what you just said, because it also reminds me of a podcast I listened to. I think it was Harvard EdCast or EdSurge, one of the two. I always listen to them both. But one of them was talking, and there was a professor who was theorizing or contemplating what will ChatGPT and AI do to education. And will it actually create a situation where students are learning just through the computer? And will the teacher go away? And kind of the basis of his response and conversation around this was based on some research he'd done. And ultimately what he was saying was that students don't want that. Students want the opportunity to work with other students and that social interaction and that learning that you get from working on teams and on projects, et cetera. And fundamentally, to the other question before about assessment and how would it maybe change, that whole notion of authentic assessment is core to the constructivist pedagogy, which is all about doing what you would enable, helping students to learn and acquire knowledge about certain concepts, and then demonstrating their knowledge of that by applying it to a different problem set altogether. That would be an authentic. And I remember a moment, my software company, my family business, made all of its curriculum products based on this constructivist pedagogy. And I remember it took years to get teachers to start thinking about it, like in 1989 when I first started. I remember in 1998 being in Los Angeles at this NSTA, National Science Teachers Association conference, and standing on the corner watching these two teachers screaming at each other with excitement and passion and enthusiasm, like 20 feet apart as they were trying to leave each other. And one was like, we have to integrate authentic assessment into our curriculum. We have to. And it was just so exciting. So I think that's fundamentally how you get to your problem. I think fundamentally that's kind of part of what you're saying. Students want to learn with each other. They don't want technology to replace all their learning. Having said that, I've got some other ideas, but I don't think I have time to talk about them.
Yeah, look, that's been great. I think before we wrap up, I do want to give one very special shout out to Gary over here, who's our videographer and soundman. Gary has kindly given up his time tonight to be here and to help us record this. He's just starting his video production business. And as a community where we help entrepreneurs, not just young, but also part of our mentors. So if you are in a business that needs to take some kind of video stuff, please get his number, right? We'd love to support him in his journey as he starts becoming an entrepreneur. But I really want to thank you, panelists. Ansh, amazing. Larry, great insights. Parthiv, thank you so much. And even Trinity for your guest comments. It was really wonderful. And then obviously 1880 for allowing us to host this. I'm Billy. Again, if you want to get in touch with anything that Young Founder School is doing, if you're an educator or you're a parent of a student, please grab me afterwards. We're going to be having a few drinks at the bar. But thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.